Out here on the open frontier, where the sun sinks slow and every heartbeat echoes across the canyon, love rides a wild trail of its own. Some stories ain't just about bullets and dust. They're about hearts that keep beating long after the smoke clears. Before we saddle up for today's journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with every cowboy and dreamer you know. Drop your thoughts down below. We'd love to hear your take. All right, partners, grab your hat, take a deep breath, and let's ride straight into this story. 1222. The wind swept low across the plains, carrying with it the dry scent of mesquite and gunpowder, the very breath of a land unbroken by law. Dust rose in thin spirals as the sun dropped toward the western horizon, its light spilling gold over the hard faces of the mountains. It was the kind of evening that belonged to coyotes and ghosts, to men who had seen too much, and women who had nothing left to lose. Out here, where the sky stretched wider than mercy itself, a man's worth was measured by the steadiness of his hand and the truth of his word, though both were getting scarce in these times. The town of Redstone sat like a scar against the endless desert, a crooked row of wooden buildings beaten gray by sun and sand. The saloon's swinging doors creaked even when there was no wind, and the church bell hadn't rung in years. Horses drank lazily from the trough outside the sheriff's office, tails flicking at flies, while the people of Redstone moved through their days with the slow caution of those who knew too well that peace never lasted long. Sheriff Eli McGraw stood on the porch of his office, one boot resting on the rail, the other planted firmly on the warped planks. The man looked like part of the land itself, tall, weathered, his eyes narrowed against the light. His badge caught the sun now and again, though it had lost its shine long ago. The Iron Star might have meant something once, back when the law had more to do with right and wrong than with who carried the biggest gun. He chewed on a blade of dry grass, squinting down the street. It was quiet, too quiet even for Redstone. Then came the faint rhythm of hooves. A rider, alone, kicking up a thin cloud of dust along the road that stretched out from the canyon trail. Eli straightened, resting his hand near the butt of his Colt. Travelers were a rare sight this late in the season, and a lone one even rarer. As the figure drew closer, he could make out the shape of a woman beneath a wide-brimmed hat, her long duster coat billowing behind her like a flag of dust and shadow. When she reached the edge of town, she slowed her horse, dismounted with the ease of someone born to the saddle, and looked up at the sheriff with eyes he hadn't seen in 5 long years. "Claire Dalton," Eli said, his voice low, somewhere between disbelief and memory. She gave a small nod, not smiling, not speaking, only staring back at him with that same fire that had once burned through everything she touched. "It's been a while, Sheriff," she said finally, and the sound of her voice carried a weight that settled deep in his chest. Eli swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have come back, Claire. Some folks in town still think you're the one who started that fire." Her gaze didn't waver. "That's exactly why I'm here," she said. "To find who did." The words hung in the air like gun smoke, drifting slow before the wind took them away. Years ago, when the Dalton ranch went up in flames, Redstone had watched from a distance, too afraid, too indifferent, or maybe just too tired to help. The fire took her father, old Samuel Dalton, and her brother Luke, along with everything they owned. By sunrise, Claire Dalton was gone, vanished into the wilds beyond the San Pedro, leaving behind whispers that turned into rumors, and rumors that hardened into legends. Some said she'd taken to outlaw ways. Others swore she'd joined a tribe and learned their ways of survival. But no one had expected her to come back. Not like this, not carrying that same storm in her eyes. Eli stepped aside, opening the door to his office. "You'd better come inside," he said quietly. "Too many ears out here." Inside, the room smelled of coffee, old paper, and dust. The rifle rack on the wall held 2 Winchester repeaters, and a faded wanted poster fluttered slightly in the warm air drifting through the window. Claire remained standing, her gloved hands resting on the back of a chair. "You really think someone in Redstone set that fire?" Eli asked. "I don't think," she said. "I know. Who?" She hesitated, then answered in a voice hard as desert stone. "Caleb Voss." Eli's jaw tightened. The name carried poison. Caleb Voss was the kind of man who wore charm like a polished spur. Bright, sharp, and dangerous. He'd come to Redstone a few years back with a deck of cards, a quick hand, and a faster gun. Within a year, he owned half the saloon, a third of the freight line, and enough of the townsfolk's debt to make himself untouchable. "You have proof?" Eli asked. "Not yet," she said. "But I will." Eli studied her, seeing the same fierce determination that had once both drawn him in and driven him away. She was older now, leaner, her eyes a little harder, but still the same Claire who'd ridden into Redstone 10 years ago with her father's cattle and a dream big enough to fill the whole. "Frontier, you're stirring up trouble by coming here," he said finally. "Caleb's not the forgiving kind." "Neither am I," she replied. That night, the saloon was alive in a way only frontier nights could be. Lanterns burned low, their yellow glow mixing with the smoke that hung in the air like fog. A piano played something half-remembered, a tune that didn't quite fit the laughter and the lies spilling from the tables. The Desert Rose had seen better days, but it still stood proud. A haven for drifters, dreamers, and those who'd lost both. Behind the bar, Miss Lila kept her kingdom in order. She'd run the place since her husband died in a mining accident, and she did it with a mix of velvet and steel. Her hair was the color of autumn whiskey, her eyes sharp enough to slice through any lie. When Claire walked in, conversation thinned, eyes turned, and the piano faltered for a beat. "Well, I'll be," Lila said, setting down the glass she'd been polishing. "The ghost of Dalton's girl." "Good to see you too, Lila," Claire answered evenly. "You're either brave or foolish coming back here. Maybe both. What are you looking for?" Caleb Voss. That name changed the air. A few men at the tables exchanged glances. One coughed nervously and looked away. Lila leaned closer, voice low. "He's upstairs. But if you're planning what I think you are, tread careful. That man doesn't lose easy." Claire nodded once and started up the stairs. The hallway was narrow and dim, the floorboards groaning under her boots. Light spilled from the crack beneath a door at the far end, along with the sound of laughter and clinking coins. She didn't knock. One kick sent the door flying open. Caleb Voss sat at a poker table, hat tipped back, cards in hand, his smirk slow and venomous. The men beside him froze, eyes darting between them. "Well now," Caleb drawled, "if it ain't the Lady of Ashes herself." "You set that fire, Voss," Claire said, her voice steady. He laughed, low and lazy. "That old story again? You've been gone too long to be starting ghost hunts." She didn't flinch. "I lost everything that night. I'm not leaving without the truth." "Truth?" He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Truth is, your daddy stole from the wrong man. He wanted power. He just couldn't pay for it." Her gun was in her hand before he finished the sentence, but before she could pull the trigger, the door burst open behind her. A shot cracked through the room, the sound tearing the air apart. Claire stumbled forward, pain searing through her arm as the bullet grazed her. Caleb's men scrambled, overturning the table. Another shot thundered, this time from the doorway. Caleb's second man dropped, clutching his chest. Eli McGraw stepped in, rifle leveled, eyes blazing. "Drop it, Voss." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The lamp flickered, casting wild shadows. Then Caleb slowly raised his hands, his smile returning, smooth as snake oil. "Sheriff," he said, "seems like a misunderstanding. The lady came in shooting." "She didn't fire a damn thing," said Lila, appearing behind Eli. pistol drawn and steady. "I saw the whole thing." Eli's grip tightened on the rifle. "You'll get your say in court, Voss. But for now, you're coming with me." Caleb laughed softly, like a man who already knew the ending of his own story. "You really think your little jail can hold me, McGraw?" Eli just said, "We'll find out." That night, the cell door clanged shut, echoing through the empty street. Redstone had its first prisoner in months, and for once, folks dared to talk about justice again. But not everyone believed it would last. Inside the sheriff's office, the lamplight flickered across the desk as Eli poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. Claire sat across from him, her sleeve torn and bloodied, but her spirit unbroken. "You should have told me you were coming back," he said. "I didn't plan to stay long. You came for revenge, didn't you?" "I came for the truth." "Whatever's left of it," Eli sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The truth doesn't change much out here. Men like Caleb always land on their feet. Money buys forgiveness, even when it shouldn't." She looked up at him. "Then maybe it's time someone stopped buying it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the roof. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled over the desert hills. 2 nights later, Redstone was woken by the sound of an explosion. The jailhouse windows shattered, fire spilling out into the storm. Eli hit the ground running, his boots splashing through the mud. When he reached the door, the roof was caving in, flames clawing at the sky. "Caleb," he shouted, but it was no use. The cell was empty. Chains lay broken on the floor, the iron bars bent outward. Caleb Voss had vanished into the storm, leaving only smoke and ashes behind. By sunrise, the rain had turned the dirt street into a river of black mud. The townsfolk gathered, whispering, pointing, afraid. Lila stood beside Claire near the wreckage, her eyes red from the smoke. "He's gone," Eli said bitterly, kicking at the twisted metal. Claire looked out toward the open plains, where the tracks disappeared into the horizon. "He'll come for me next," she said quietly. Eli turned to her. "Then we'll be ready," but she shook her head. "This is my fight, Eli, always has been." The sheriff stared at her, frustration etched deep in his face. "You don't have to do this alone." "Yes," she said softly. "I do." The sun broke through the clouds then, pale and weak, casting long shadows over Redstone. The wind carried the smell of smoke and rain, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out over the canyon. The storm had passed, but another was coming. One made not of rain and thunder, but of blood and vengeance. And Claire Dalton, the woman who had lost everything to fire, was ready to face it. The morning after the fire, Redstone was silent. Smoke still drifted above the blackened timbers of the jail, and the streets were littered with the ash of what had been law. Folks avoided meeting each other's eyes, as if guilt hung in the air thicker than the dust. The only sound came from the steady hammering of hooves as riders gathered supplies, preparing for what everyone knew was coming. Caleb Voss was loose again, and vengeance never traveled alone. Sheriff Eli McGraw hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw set tight. He stood by the office window, watching Claire Dalton load her rifle. Her wounded arm was wrapped, but she worked through the pain, checking the chambers with the precision of someone who had long since made peace with violence. "You're going after him," Eli said flatly. "I have to. You don't even know where he is." "Yes, I do," she said. "Dalton Canyon," he frowned. "That's your land." "It was my father's," she corrected. "And it's where Caleb will go. He wants to finish what he started." Eli grabbed his hat, slung his Winchester over his shoulder, and followed her out the door. "Then he won't be facing you alone." She paused by her horse, looking at him for a long moment. "You know what riding out there means?" He nodded. "Yeah, Means I might finally get to do something right. They rode out of town before sunrise, the desert stretching ahead of them like a sleeping beast. The air was cool, the wind dry, the world painted in the pale colors of dawn. They didn't speak much. There wasn't anything left to say. By midday, they reached the ridge overlooking the old Dalton ranch. What once had been acres of green pasture was now nothing more than cracked earth and charred skeletons of buildings. The barn stood half-collapsed, its blackened frame cutting sharp against the sky. The ghosts of that fire still lived here. In the silence, in the smell, in the emptiness. Claire dismounted slowly, scanning the valley below. "He's here," she murmured. Eli followed her gaze. 3 horses were tied near the barn. Smoke drifted from a dying campfire. He checked his rifle, the metal cool in his hands. "You take the right. I'll circle left." She gave a single nod and moved through the grass, her coat brushing against the dry sage. Every step carried her closer to the man who had destroyed her life. Inside the barn, Caleb Voss sat on a crate, cleaning his gun. His eyes flicked up as the shadow crossed the doorway. "I knew you'd come," he said. Claire stepped in, her revolver aimed steady. "You took my family, Caleb. You took my home. I'm here to take back what's left of my name." Caleb smirked. "You think killing me will bring them back? You think it'll make you clean again?" She said nothing, only moved closer, boots crunching over the dirt floor. "You should be thanking me," he continued, voice smooth, almost gentle. "Your father wasn't a saint. He took land that didn't belong to him, land that was promised to me. He made me the villain because I wouldn't bow to him, so I burned down his lie. You murdered them," Caleb shrugged. "They died because they stood in the way. The frontier doesn't care about right and wrong, only who survives." Claire's hand trembled slightly on the gun, but her eyes never left his. "Then today, the frontier takes you." Before she could fire, movement flashed from the corner of her eye. One of Caleb's men stepped from behind a beam, rifle raised. But the shot came from outside first. The man dropped, clutching his chest, and Eli's voice rang out from the doorway. "It's over, Voss." Caleb swung his pistol toward the sound, firing. The bullet tore through the wall, splintering wood inches from Eli's head. Eli returned fire, the echo thunderous inside the barn. Caleb dove for cover, rolling behind a trough. Smoke filled the room. Dust and sunlight mixed into chaos. Claire advanced, heart pounding, eyes searching through the haze. "Come on, Claire." Caleb's voice taunted from somewhere in the haze. "You think you can do better than your father? You think you can live with blood on your hands?" Her voice came back cold and clear. "I've been living with yours for 5 years." She fired once, the bullet striking the beam beside him. Caleb turned to shoot back, but Eli's shot found his shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to one knee, blood blooming dark on his shirt. Claire stepped forward, revolver aimed steady. "Do it!" he spat, defiant even in pain. "End it!" Eli's voice came from behind her. "You don't have to." But Claire's eyes were fixed on the man in front of her. The man who had burned her life to ashes. "Yes, I do." The gun roared once, echoing through the canyon. Caleb Voss collapsed backward, eyes wide, disbelief carved into his face. "Guess I finally lost a bet," he whispered, and then went still. For a moment, the world was silent, except for the wind moving through the ruined barn. Claire stood there, staring at him, the revolver still trembling in her hand. Eli approached slowly, his rifle lowered. "It's done," he said quietly. She nodded, her breath uneven. "It doesn't feel like victory." Justice rarely does. They buried Caleb Voss near the canyon rim where the rocks met the open desert. The sky was deep orange, the sun sinking slow and heavy. No one spoke a prayer. Some men didn't deserve one. As the last shovelful of dirt hit the grave, Claire turned to Eli. "You think this changes anything?" He shook his head. Maybe not, but it's a start. The ride back to Redstone was long and silent. When they reached the edge of town, the lamps were being lit along Main Street. The saloon's piano played a slow tune, and Miss Lila stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching them approach. She didn't ask what had happened. She could see it in their faces. Days turned into weeks. Redstone began to breathe again. The railroad men returned, hammering steel and laying tracks that glinted in the sun. Lila reopened the Desert Rose, her laughter returning to the smoky air. Folks began to talk less about fires and more about futures. The Dalton ranch rose again, plank by plank, rebuilt by Claire's hands. She worked from dawn till dusk, her arms still scarred but strong. Every day, Eli would ride out to check on her, though they both knew he didn't come just to check fences. One evening, as the sky burned gold over the hills, she found him sitting on the porch rail, hat tilted back, watching the horizon. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "And go where?" "This land's got my blood in it. My story starts and ends right here." He nodded slowly. "Then I reckon I'll stay right here with you." The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the valley. In the distance, the whistle of a train echoed, the sound of change, of time moving on. Claire looked toward it, then back at Eli. For the first time in years, the ache in her chest felt lighter. Redstone had been a place of loss, of dust and pain. But under the same sky that had once burned her world to the ground, she'd found something worth living for again. And as the last light faded over the canyon, two riders sat in silence, watching the desert breathe, knowing that in this wild, untamed land, hearts could still find their way home.